A few years ago, I ran across a quote that startled me by how radical it sounded the first time I heard it. The line goes like this: "My learning is not my own, it belongs to the unlearned and is the debt I owe to them. My wisdom belongs to the foolish, my power to the oppressed. Thus my wealth belongs to the poor, and my righteousness to the sinners." At first I thought, what social revolutionary said words like that? That has the power to transform everything. That sounds like an activist. That sounds like some countercultural voice. It's Martin Luther, the 16th century reformer. Where did he get such an idea like that honestly sounds kind of shocking to some modern ears? It turns out he got it from the Apostle Paul in the letter to the Galatians, which is where we're headed today in this episode of Freed for Love. We're getting close to the end of Paul's letter to the Galatians, and instead of going out with a whimper, the apostle gathers up all the ideas he's been working with so far, not to say, so because you're saved by grace, do whatever you want, but rather, because you are in right relationship with God as a free gift of grace, because God runs the universe and the kingdom and the body of Christ on the economy of grace, you have the calling to share what resources you have been blessed with to take care of other people around you, the same way God has blessed you in the first place, beyond your earning or deserving. So as we turn into chapter 6, Paul had moved away from the idea of being bound to or captive to the sort of barking orders power of the law, and was talking at the end of chapter 5 about also don't live by just giving into your animal impulses, what he calls sort of living by the flesh. It turns out that's also not a really free way of life either, just sort of constantly being ruled by whatever chemicals in your brain or gut impulses tell you to do. That's not really a good way of life either. Instead, Paul says living by the Spirit opens you up to the life that really is life, and he describes it. He fleshed it out for us, right? Love, joy, peace, gentleness, kindness, goodness, generosity, self-control. That kind of life, Paul says, is what we were really made for in the first place, and it's a good kind of life. So he turns now in Galatians 6 to say this really, really central idea. We're called, he says, to bear one another's burdens. And that is the key, he says, loving one another in a way that isn't just sentimental, emotional, but actually showing up for each other, bearing one another's burdens, caring for the needs of all. That's what it is to fulfill what he calls the law of Christ. It's interesting, he has moved away from the idea of the old commandments and law of the Torah that included rules like you have to be circumcised, you have to be keep kosher, that kind of thing. Paul has said, no, God's doing a new thing where you don't have to fit those other cultural expectations to become a follower of Jesus. But Jesus does have a way of life we're called to, and it's centered on love. So Paul says, bear one another's burdens. That's how you fulfill the commandment, the law, the direction, the instruction of Christ. And look out for the needs of all. Yeah, especially us in the Christian community, but everybody. We have a calling. We have a new identity as the people of God, to love and care for the needs of everybody around us. Reflecting on that is where Martin Luther, our older brother in the faith, especially for us Lutheran Christians, where in his commentary on Galatians, he said that line that first captivated my attention. The full quote again: if there's anything in us, it's not our own, it is a gift of God. But if it is a gift of God, it is entirely a debt one owes to love, that is, to the law of Christ. And if it is a debt to love, then I must serve others with it, not myself. And then that sort of climactic piece, thus my learning is not my own, it belongs to the unlearned and is the debt I owe to them. My wisdom belongs to the foolish, my power to the oppressed. Thus my wealth belongs to the poor and my righteousness to the sinners. In other words, whatever good things I have, these are gifts that God gave me in the first place. I am called, therefore, to share them freely with the people around me. That's what it looks like to live in an economy of grace. That's what it looks like to live in the new order of things that God has begun in Jesus. And again, Martin Luther didn't invent this idea. He's just reading Paul in the first century. And where did Paul get an idea like this? This is our way of living in the world, to love others that way. Well, of course, Paul gets it from Jesus, right? Who is the one who embodies this kind of giving himself away in full, complete love for the people around him. Not just the people who like him, not just his inner group of disciples, but strangers and enemies as well. The same Jesus who washes the feet of his disciples, who pours himself out, emptying himself all the way to a cross. The same Jesus who uses his divine status, right? He uses the amazing power he is filled with by the Spirit, not for his own well-being or for his own richness or comfort, but to heal and to raise the dead and to bless and to feed other people. People like Paul and even our older brother Martin Luther are simply taking seriously the way of life Jesus lived. That's where the 6th chapter of Galatians takes us, to actually saying if it's true, the way of Jesus, the Jesus way of life is true and becomes our way of life, then we're going to be people who use our resources to bear one another's burdens, to care for the needs of all people, because that's the Jesus way of life. And it will sound radical in a culture like ours that is so often only interested in, I got to look out for me and my group first. We have to be self-centered. We have to take care of our own. And the way of Jesus looks so different. It turns that inside out and says, no, whatever resources, whatever strength, whatever good things we have, they are meant to be shared. To misunderstand that is to misunderstand the grace of God and the character of Jesus. It's radical stuff to take Jesus seriously, especially the way Paul fleshes it out for here's what it looks like to take it seriously in our communal life together. Is radical, beautifully radical, maybe even downright revolutionary and subversive. That's what Paul intends. That's what Jesus intends with the community that he created that we now call church. We're a part of it. And every time we settle for turning church into just like a little social club or like a hobby or something I do with my Sunday mornings that doesn't dramatically revamp and revise the way I see the world, we're missing out on this beautiful vision where my strengths are meant to be shared with others and other strengths are meant to be shared with me as well. That's a beautiful way of life we're invited into. And we're going to take a look a little more deeply at what does that look like in our actual lived daily lives. So join us for that conversation this Thursday as we continue our second last session in Freed for Love, our study of Galatians, this Thursday here at Community of Christ. And if you can't be with us in person, catch up with these video summaries too. We'll see you along the way.